My name is Sarah Miller, and I was exactly 3 days away from marrying Grant Blackwood, the man who held my heart, yet was utterly unaware of the $9 million secret I carried. I was 28, a CEO who looked like an earnest young professional, which was precisely the point. For 3 years, I had navigated the treacherous waters of Chicago's old money, enduring the constant, subtle condescension of the Blackwood dynasty while hiding a financial profile that could rival many of their lesser holdings. My net worth, nearly $9 million, was a carefully constructed reality. Most of it was the legacy of my late grandfather, a high school teacher in Evanston who was also a brilliant, quiet investment wizard. He left me a fortune, built not on showmanship, but on foresight, demanding that I use it to protect my independence. The rest was the hard-won equity of TutorFlow, the educational software company I built myself. I drove a practical 5-year-old Ford, lived in a respectable but small condo in Lincoln Park, and avoided the jewelry and labels that signaled instant wealth in their circle. This wasn't shame, it was a choice for authenticity. I wanted Grant to love Sarah Miller, the entrepreneur, the passionate advocate for education, the daughter of 2 dedicated public school teachers. I wanted a love untainted by the gold-digging narrative the Blackwoods clearly entertained. Grant, the heir to the prestigious Blackwood and Associates law firm, loved that version of me. He loved my passion and my independence. He had only ever seen the modest facade, a calculated, protective layer of camouflage. His parents, Richard and Victoria Blackwood, had turned their low-grade disdain for my middle-class origins into an art form. Victoria, the matriarch, a woman whose tailoring budget exceeded my annual gross income, never missed an opportunity. "Your TutorFlow is certainly a charming little venture, dear," she'd purr over dinner, though I imagined scaling it must be quite the headache without serious capital. Or, "Your parents' profession is so noble, Sarah. Such a necessary sacrifice for the greater good." These weren't compliments. They were calculated maneuvers designed to remind me of the cavernous gap in our perceived social standing. I rationalized that I could endure it. I told myself that once Grant and I were married, we would move into our own space, define our own lives, and put distance between ourselves and their constant judgment. I was wrong. The ambush began the morning after I'd finalized the floral arrangements. Victoria called, her voice dripping with an unnerving, almost sickening sweetness, inviting me to an impromptu girls' tea at the estate. I was operating on minimal sleep and maximum stress, and all I registered was a desperate hope for a fleeting moment of connection with my future mother-in-law. I should have recognized the predatory nature of the invitation. When I arrived at the sprawling Lake Forest property, Richard's custom Mercedes was already parked, a sudden, alarming presence. Victoria had explicitly said this was just a private meeting. Marta, the housekeeper, led me not to the bright, welcoming sunroom, but to the formal sitting room, where the light seemed dimmer and the mahogany furniture heavier. Richard and Victoria were already seated, dressed for a high-stakes corporate negotiation, not tea. "We thought it important to discuss a few final matters before the wedding," Richard announced, his voice devoid of warmth, cutting straight to the chase. Victoria layered the threat with the thinnest veneer of forced politeness. Every successful marriage, especially one uniting 2 families of such different means, requires a solid foundation of clear, documented agreements, Sarah. My stomach twisted into a knot. Richard produced a thick, heavy document bound in a deep blue cover and slid it across the coffee table toward me. A standard prenuptial agreement prepared by their top family counsel. It outlines the absolute protection of generational assets, he stated flatly. I did not immediately touch it. This is the first I am hearing about this, I said, meeting Richard's gaze, my voice surprisingly steady. Victoria interjected, her tone coolly dismissive. Grant understands the necessity of this formality. Every spouse marrying into the Blackwood family completes this. I finally picked up the document. As a CEO who deals in contracts daily, I recognized the predatory language instantly. This agreement was not just protective. It was annihilating, ensuring I walked away with precisely nothing, regardless of contribution or duration. The most egregious part was Section 4, the intellectual property clause, which used vaguely defined terms that could potentially allow Blackwood and Associates to claim rights to my company, Tudor Flow, under the guise of shared marital asset development. This seems incredibly one-sided, I managed, fighting to keep the rage from my voice. Victoria let out a brittle, high-pitched laugh. Your educational software venture is charming, dear, but we are discussing tangible, multi-generational, real estate-backed wealth. The scale is quite different, Sarah. We must be practical. When I asked when it needed to be signed, Victoria produced her jewel-encrusted Mont Blanc pen. Today would be absolutely ideal. I insisted on 24 hours to consult my attorney, Harold. Richard leaned forward, his voice turning into a flat, professional warning. We must insist on having this resolved today, Sarah. These matters become complicated if left until the last moment. I asked for absolute clarity, needing to hear the threat out loud. Are you saying the wedding depends on me signing this document today, without professional legal advice? Victoria's cold, triumphant smile returned, confirming my worst fears. Sign it, or the wedding is off, Richard stated bluntly, delivering the final, shocking ultimatum. I stood up, clutching the prenup. I will need to discuss this with Grant. As I walked out, I heard Victoria's triumphant voice drifting from the sitting room window. She'll sign. Where else would she find a match like Grant? Certainly not in whatever financially strained community her parents frequent. Richard's low, satisfied chuckle followed. The tears started the moment I drove past the ornate iron gates of the Blackwood estate, but beneath the humiliation, a cold, hard resolve took root. They wanted to talk about money and power? Fine. It was time they met the real Sarah Miller. The drive back to my downtown condo was a blur of searing humiliation, broken by sudden, wrenching sobs. I had to pull over twice on the Eisenhower Expressway when the crying made the road too hazy to navigate. My phone vibrated relentlessly on the passenger seat, Grant's name flashing repeatedly, but I let it go to voicemail. I simply couldn't talk to him yet. Not while the memory of Victoria's smug face and the sound of Richard's dismissive voice, the casual brutality of their ultimatum, was still a fresh wound. At a red light, I gripped the steering wheel, trying to piece together the fragments of the past 3 years. Every subtle jab, every patronizing question, every slight I had dismissed as mere social awkwardness now snapped into focus as part of a consistent, calculated campaign to undermine my self-worth. They never saw me as a person. I was a liability, a potential financial drain on their dynasty. I finally reached my modest but perfectly kept condo. I walked straight to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the thick, blue prenup document lying on the coffee table. It wasn't just a legal contract. It was a physical manifestation of their disdain, a weapon designed to extract my compliance and erase my identity. The first person I called was Jenna. My best friend answered immediately, her voice laced with worry. Sarah, what happened? Grant's been blowing up my phone. I recounted the ambush, the formal setting, Richard's flat delivery, Victoria's condescension, and the chilling final ultimatum. They did what? Jenna's voice rose with indignation that matched my own. 3 days before the wedding? That is beyond low, Sarah. That's not just tacky. That's corporate extortion. The worst part, I admitted, sinking onto my couch, the leather cool against my back, is that they heavily implied Grant knew about their non-negotiable expectations. He just didn't have the spine to tell me himself. You don't know that for sure, Jenna cautioned, ever the voice of reason. His parents are master manipulators. They could be bluffing to break you. Either way, it doesn't look good for him, Jenna, I replied, the bitterness sharp in my throat. Either he knew and let them ambush me, or he has so little control in his relationship with them that they can threaten to cancel his wedding without his knowledge. We talked at length about the intellectual property clause, the section that could potentially give the Blackwoods a claim to my company, Tudorflow. That was where the line was drawn. My business wasn't just money. It was my passion, the intellectual legacy of my hard work and my grandfather's faith in me. The idea that Victoria could casually dismiss it as a charming little venture, while simultaneously trying to legally ensnare its assets, fueled a cold, quiet anger that completely eclipsed the last of my tears. You know what you have to do, Jenna finally said, her voice firm. Call Harold Winters. First thing. Let him unleash hell. Harold, my grandfather's attorney, was the only lawyer I trusted implicitly. He knew every penny of my inheritance and every equity stake in Tudorflow. I will, I promised. But first, I have to talk to Grant. I need to understand where he stands, not as a Blackwood heir, but as the man who is supposed to be my partner. After hanging up, I finally gathered the nerve to return Grant's calls. He answered immediately, his voice thick with concern and fear. Sarah, thank God. My mother called me. She said you left upset. What happened? She just said you were being difficult about the agreement. What happened, Grant? I said, choosing my words carefully, allowing the cold professional tone to dictate the pace, is that your parents ambushed me with a predatory contract and gave me until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to sign it or cancel the wedding. They also heavily implied you were fully aware of the plan. The silence on the other end of the line was the sound of my heart shattering. I didn't know they were going to approach you like that, he finally stammered. So you did know about the prenup? I confirmed, the residual hope dissolving into fine dust. He sighed heavily, falling back on the family script. Sarah, try to understand. Every marriage in my family for generations has had a prenuptial agreement. It's just how things are done. It's a family mandate. And you didn't think this was something to mention to me before your parents cornered me like a hostile witness 3 days before our wedding? I challenged him. I was going to bring it up. I just kept putting it off, he confessed, his tone immediately turning defensive. I knew it would upset you, and wedding planning was already stressful enough. I was trying to protect you from the drama. Protect me. That word, it was a betrayal. You protected me, I said bitterly, by letting your parents blindside me with an ultimatum? By letting them include clauses that could give them a claim to my company? That's not protection, Grant. That is cowardice. He bristled. You are overreacting. It's just a standard legal document. Everyone signs them. You don't have Blackwood-level assets to worry about. That insult was the final hard lesson. He truly believed I was relying on his money. He hadn't seen me, the real me, at all. Have you actually read it, Grant? I pressed. Another pause. Not in detail. Dad said it was the standard family template. The standard family template ensures I walk away with nothing, Grant. I summarized, my voice dangerously low. Read section 4, paragraph 3. Read it and tell me if you are proud of what your family template stands for. The rustling sound of paper indicated he was finally looking at the contract. When he spoke again, the uncertainty in his voice was chilling. This language, it is more aggressive than I expected. That IP clause shouldn't be there. They gave me until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Sign or cancel the wedding, I reminded him. What is your position on that ultimatum? They should not have done that. Of course the wedding is not contingent on this. We can work it out. Can we? I asked, pushing back, forcing the choice. Because your mother made it very clear this is a non-negotiable condition for marrying into the Blackwood family. I need to know where you stand, Grant. With your parents or with me. They forced this choice. I love you, he pleaded, but they are my family. And what am I supposed to be in 3 days? I asked quietly, leaving the question hanging unanswered. An appendage? A controlled asset? I ended the call before he could respond. I sat there, the silence heavy again, but the tears were gone. In their place was the cold, clinical clarity of a CEO facing a crisis. They wanted to make this a financial game. I pulled up my secure financial portal. I looked at the verified valuation of Tutorflow, $1.5 million. I looked at the diversified funds for my inheritance, $7.5 million. Total net worth, $9 million. It was time to stop hiding my light. My silence had allowed them to write a false narrative about me. They saw a gold digger. They were about to meet an equal, a force they had grossly underestimated. I grabbed my phone and texted Harold Winters. Urgent meeting. 7 a.m. sharp at my office. Prenup situation. Bring the full portfolio details. I slept fitfully that night, not from worry, but from the cold, hard realization that my impending marriage was hanging by a thread of corporate power play, not a bond of trust. The fear was replaced by a steely, focused resolve. When my alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., I felt strangely energized, almost manic. The time for anxiety was over. The time for execution had begun. I dressed with meticulous intention. This wasn't a day for the unassuming attire I usually wore to the office. I chose my power uniform, a sharply tailored, charcoal gray pantsuit, the kind that whispered Wall Street authority, not educational software, earnestness. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, professional ponytail and put on the delicate pearl earrings my grandfather had given me years ago. They were more than jewelry. They were a talisman, a quiet reminder of the man who instilled in me the value of earning my worth and protecting my independence. They were my personal standard. By 6:45 a.m., I was at my downtown Chicago office, the morning sun reflecting off the glass towers. I was alone, reviewing the Blackwood prenup line by line, marking every single predatory clause and documenting the exact point of the intellectual property grab. The coffee was black, and my focus was absolute. At 7 a.m. precisely, Harold Winters arrived. At 72, Harold was still a formidable sight, the last of the great old-school legal lions. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his bespoke suit immaculate, and he carried the battered leather briefcase that had likely seen more legal battles than I'd seen fiscal years. He was an embodiment of seasoned, unflappable power. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted me, his deep, rumbling voice conveying both concern and immediate strategic focus. "Your text was certainly alarming. A prenup 3 days out? Even for the Blackwoods, That's remarkably tacky. I slid the thick, blue document across the conference table to him. Tacky is putting it mildly, Harold. It's an eviction notice wrapped in legalese. And they gave me an ultimatum. Sign by 9 a.m. today, or the wedding is off. I need your eyes on Section 4, the IP clause. Harold put on his thin gold reading glasses, which contrasted sharply with his bushy white eyebrows, and began to scan the document. For 15 minutes, the only sound in the office was the gentle turning of pages and the quiet whir of the city outside. His expression grew increasingly grave, particularly as he reached the asset division and intellectual property clauses. Finally, he set the contract down and removed his glasses, his eyes sharp and focused. "Sarah," he stated flatly, his voice carrying the full weight of his decades of experience, "this is one of the most aggressively one-sided prenuptial agreements I have seen in 45 years of practice. It's designed to protect everything the Blackwoods have and potentially appropriate anything you might build while married to Grant. It's borderline unenforceable due to duress, given the timing, but fighting it in court is a public disaster." "Can we fight it?" I asked, my voice holding steady. A slow, delighted smile spread across Harold's face, the kind of smile that had been the downfall of countless opposing counsels. It was the smile of the wise, old warrior recognizing a worthy battle. "My dear, we won't just fight it. We will eviscerate it, and we will replace it with an agreement that protects your substantial interests." He opened his briefcase, extracting a legal pad and a gold-plated pen. "Let's confirm the landscape. Your current net worth stands at approximately $9 million. Is that correct?" I nodded, sliding a folder containing my updated financial statements, bank accounts, investment diversification, and the latest Tudor Flow valuation across the table. Everything verified as of last month, and the Blackwoods are completely unaware of this fact. Harold chuckled, a deep, satisfied sound that conveyed genuine amusement. "Oh, this is going to be the most delicious revelation of the decade." They believe they are dealing with a sweet little middle-class girl. They are about to deal with a sophisticated $9 million entrepreneur. I stressed my goal, looking him directly in the eye. "I want to salvage the marriage, Harold, not because I need the Blackwood name, but because I truly love Grant. But I will only marry him if he is willing to stand with me as a true partner, and only if his parents recognize me as an equal, not a charity case." "Very well," Harold nodded, his pen scratching against the pad. "Then we craft the counteroffer, a fair, balanced, bulletproof agreement that protects both parties equally. We turn their weapon into a shield." For the next 2 hours, the wisdom of Harold Winters was on full display. He dictated new, clear, ironclad language. He meticulously protected my intellectual property rights from any potential Blackwood claim. He established fair terms for property division based on marital contribution and duration. He was precise, focused, and utterly ruthless in ensuring my financial autonomy. "Now for the presentation strategy," Harold announced, reviewing the finalized counter-agreement. "Timing and setting are crucial. You cannot deliver this truth bomb in their boardroom, Sarah. You need neutral ground, a place upscale enough to appeal to the Blackwood ego, but outside their territorial jurisdiction. The private dining room at the Lakeview restaurant, I decided instantly. It was high-end, discreet, and perfectly neutral. Tonight." "Excellent," Harold approved. "And the supporting documentation, that folder you just gave me? Keep it with you. The moment they balk, you present the evidence. You don't ask for respect, Sarah. You command it with proof of your own power. When Harold left at 10:30 a.m., I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a general prepared for battle. The hiding was over. The time for the truth, my truth, had arrived. After Harold left, the adrenaline was coursing through me, lending me a chilling, almost detached clarity. I had a counteroffer prepared, a legal masterpiece that spoke volumes about my capacity and my worth. But the next step was the most crucial and the most terrifying, the conversation with Grant. I needed to know if I was fighting for a man who would stand resolutely beside me, or just fighting for a wedding that was already fatally tainted by his family's manipulation. I sent him a simple, definitive text that cut through the noise of the last 12 hours. We need to talk. Meet me at Carlucci's at 1 p.m. Just us. No phone calls with family before. Carlucci's was an upscale Italian place where we celebrated our first anniversary. A place of good, untainted memories, a subtle attempt to anchor this turbulent conversation in the love we shared, not the war we were fighting. His reply came instantly, thick with relief. I'll be there. I love you. Those 3 words brought a fresh wave of vulnerability. Despite everything, I knew he meant them. The real question was, did his love for me outweigh his ingrained fear of defying his powerful family? I arrived a few minutes early, needing the silence to compose myself, to mentally rehearse the presentation of my truth. I found a quiet, secluded corner booth, perfectly suited for the intense, private conversation ahead. At 1 p.m. precisely, Grant walked in. He looked utterly defeated. His usually immaculate appearance was slightly rumpled. His suit looked slept in, his tie was crooked, and there were deep, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight, the stress of the ultimatum visibly crushing him. When he saw me, a flood of desperate relief washed over his face, mixed with profound shame. "Sarah," he said, sliding into the seat across from me, his voice a strained whisper. "Thank you for meeting me. I've been sick with worry since our call last night." I met his eyes, searching for the man I loved, not the privileged heir. I kept my hand firmly on the table, not allowing him to hold it yet. "I almost didn't come, Grant. Your parents put me in an impossible position. They made me feel like an object to be controlled." "I know, and I am so sorry," he whispered, his head bowed slightly. "I spoke with them last night. It did not go well." "What happened?" I asked, my voice calm but demanding detail. "I told them their ultimatum was unacceptable," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine, showing a flicker of the fight I needed to see. "I told them if anyone was going to cancel the wedding over this, it would be me, not them. I said either they withdraw the threat or I would personally call every wedding guest tonight and explain exactly why the ceremony was canceled due to their corporate overreach and disrespect." A surge of genuine, fierce pride went through me. That must have been the hardest conversation of his life. That must have been difficult, I acknowledged, softening slightly. "It was terrifying," he admitted, giving a rough, exhausted smile, "but also strangely liberating. For the first time in my life, I walked out of that house without conceding to their demands. I spent the night trying to figure out how to clean up the mess they created." The waiter approached, and we both ordered only sparkling water, neither of us having any appetite. "I studied the prenup last night," Grant continued when we were alone. "I looked up the IP clause. Sarah, I was ashamed. It's predatory, aggressive, and frankly disgusting. I told them I wouldn't sign it, and I wouldn't ask you to sign it. That document is permanently off the table. This was the full concession I needed. Now for the full truth. Grant, there is something important I need to tell you." something I've kept from you throughout our relationship." His expression shifted from remorse to deep concern. "What is it, Sarah?" "I am not who your parents think I am," I began carefully, letting the implication sink in. "Or rather, I am significantly more than they have assumed." I reached into my bag and withdrew the financial folder. I didn't lead with my voice. I led with the facts. When my grandfather died during my senior year of college, he left me an inheritance, a substantial one. I slid the folder across the table, the contents facing him. He opened it, his puzzled expression transforming first to shock, and then to absolute, dizzying disbelief as he scanned the documents. $7.5 million, he read, his voice barely a whisper. He flipped the page to the company valuation. "And your company, another $1.5 million in valuation? Sarah, this is $9 million. Why did you never tell me? Did you not trust me?" "For the same reason you don't introduce yourself as Grant Blackwood to every person you meet," I explained, letting the honesty pour out. "I wanted to be known for who I am, not what I have. I saw how much emphasis your family placed on wealth, and I was genuinely curious how they would treat me without the knowledge of my bank account." He looked up, his expression a mixture of astonishment and hurt. "A test?" he asked, his voice low. "You were testing my family." "Not of you," I clarified, finally reaching to take his hand. "Never of you. But yes, it became a test of their character, one they failed spectacularly yesterday. They saw a gold digger. They were about to meet an equal. The irony is staggering." He absorbed the information, still grappling with the scale of the revelation. "I understand your reasoning, Sarah, but I can't help feeling there was a lack of transparency between us. That cuts both ways." "You are right," I conceded immediately. "Perfect honesty from both of us would have avoided this entire crisis. But we are here now. We need to decide where we go from here as equal partners." I pulled out the third folder, the counter-prenup Harold and I had drafted. "I want a marriage of equals, Grant. I want a partnership where we both protect what we've built individually while committing to building something greater together." He read the new document quickly, his lawyer's mind grasping the fairness instantly. "This is entirely reasonable," he said, looking up with renewed admiration. "Balanced protection for both parties, clear terms on IP, fair approach to assets acquired during marriage." "That is what a prenuptial agreement should be," I replied. "A shield, not a weapon." He closed the folder and squeezed my hand firmly, his eyes unwavering. "I made a choice last night. I chose us. I love your brilliance, your integrity, your courage. Whether you have $9 or $9 million does not change that. I am in this, Sarah." "Then here is what I propose," I said, laying out the final plan. "We meet with your parents tonight at the Lake View restaurant. Together, we present this new agreement as non-negotiable. We make it clear that our marriage will be a partnership of equals, and they need to reflect that reality." He nodded, the last vestige of indecision gone, replaced by determination. "They will not take the news well, especially my mother. But you're right. It's time to establish boundaries that should have been set long ago." He raised his glass of sparkling water to facing the Blackwood Inquisition together. At precisely 6 o'clock that evening, the hour of maximum drama, Grant and I pulled up to the entrance of the Lakeview restaurant. I had meticulously chosen the venue, not just for its neutrality, but for its exclusive high society reputation. It was a place the Blackwoods respected, a discreet stage for our impending corporate confrontation. The staff here were known for their professionalism, trained to observe everything but speak of nothing, which was exactly what we needed. Grant helped me out of the car. We were dressed for a non-negotiable victory. He was in a sharply tailored navy suit that projected quiet authority, a stark contrast to the slightly rumpled exhaustion of the morning. I wore a cream-colored silk dress, elegant, refined, and paired with my grandfather's pearl earrings, a subtle nod to the humble source of my true power. I felt a cool, almost surgical focus. The fear was entirely replaced by the calm, hard logic of a CEO walking into a decisive board meeting. "Ready," Grant whispered, his hand warm and solid on my back, a constant reminder of our united front. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, squeezing his hand. The maitre d', who knew Grant by name, led us to the private dining room I had reserved. It was stunning. A large mahogany table, crystal glasses, and a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, the water glittering ominously under the early twilight sky. We settled side by side. We ordered only sparkling water, needing absolute sobriety for the confrontation ahead. "They'll be late," Grant predicted, glancing at his watch. "It's a power play. Mom never grants you the courtesy of punctuality." He was exactly right. At 6:17 p.m., the door opened. Richard and Victoria Blackwood walked in. Richard looked bored, confident, and utterly dismissive of my presence. Victoria was draped in a deep burgundy designer gown, her diamond earrings sparkling with every subtle, judgmental movement of her head. She air-kissed Grant, then offered me a barely there nod. "A private room? Rather dramatic, isn't it?" Victoria commented, settling herself elegantly across from us. "I trust Sarah has come to a sensible decision. We've managed to push the 9 a.m. deadline, but we'd like this settled now." Richard cut straight to the threat. "I trust you signed our document, Sarah. Let's not waste any more time." "Please have a seat," I said, my voice calm, the volume slightly elevated to command attention. Something in my tone must have registered, as Victoria's smile tightened slightly as she took her place. "We have reviewed your prenuptial agreement," Grant began, his voice steady and professional, laying the groundwork for our joint declaration, "and we found it unacceptable in both its approach and its terms." Richard's eyebrows shot up dramatically. "Unacceptable? It is the standard Blackwood family agreement. Your brother and sister both signed identical documents without this theatrical drama, Grant. They married people from backgrounds similar to ours," Grant pointed out, sticking precisely to our rehearsed script. "The underlying power dynamics were entirely different." "Power dynamics." Victoria scoffed, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "This is not a university debate, Grant. It is a simple legal protection that any prudent, established family would insist upon." This was my cue. I opened my leather portfolio and, with deliberate slowness, placed our counterproposal on the table, setting the folder containing my financial portfolio directly on top of it. "We agree that prudent legal protection makes sense," I said, meeting Richard's gaze directly, my voice unwavering. "Which is why we have prepared an alternative prenuptial agreement that protects both parties equally." Richard's expression darkened instantly. "That was not the arrangement. You were to sign our document, not present alternatives." "Plans change," I replied, my voice holding firm, "especially when new, relevant information comes to light." Victoria, still clinging to her narrative, sniped, "Your holdings? Your little software company hardly requires the same level of protection as generations of Blackwood real estate and firm equity. Dear, you might be surprised, Grant interjected, a sharp edge of pride in his voice. I pushed the financial statements slightly forward, ensuring they were clearly visible. My current net worth is approximately $9 million, I stated, my eyes locked on Victoria's, watching their faces collapse in real time. $7.5 million in diversified investments from my grandfather's estate, and $1.5 million in the form of my company's recent valuation. Everything is verified and current. The shock was instantaneous, total, and completely satisfying. Victoria froze, her elegant composure utterly shattered, her jaw dropping almost imperceptibly. Richard, the legal mind, recovered faster, immediately reaching for the statements with barely concealed, desperate disbelief. That's impossible, Victoria finally sputtered, the color draining from her cheeks. You drive a 5-year-old Ford. Your parents are teachers. I value financial responsibility over displays of wealth, I replied evenly, echoing the principle my grandfather instilled in me. And yes, my parents taught me the importance of education, hard work, and living within one's means. Lessons that have served me well. Much like the first Blackwood, I imagine, who built your family fortune through grit. Richard scanned the portfolio, his face shifting from disbelief to professional recognition. These appear entirely legitimate, he admitted reluctantly, his tone entirely different now, no longer patronizing, but respectful, almost competitive. Why keep this secret, Sarah? Would you have treated me differently if you had known? I countered, the question itself serving as the final, unanswerable accusation. The flush that rose on Victoria's face was answer enough. This changes the entire equation significantly, Richard murmured, lawyer mode fully engaged. We would need to have our legal team review any alternative agreement carefully before proceeding. Of course, I agreed. That is only fair, just as it would have been fair to give me time to review your original document with my attorney. You have until tomorrow afternoon. The wedding is in 2 days, and this needs to be resolved before then. Victoria looked furious and used to having deadlines imposed upon her by anyone, let alone the woman she had dismissed hours earlier. But before she could speak, Grant placed a firm hand on the table. Any proposed changes must maintain the fundamental balance of the agreement, Mom. This is not a negotiation to revert to one-sided terms. Understood. Richard nodded to his son, businessman to businessman. Understood. As they prepared to leave, Richard extended his hand to me, a firm, respectful handshake that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. You have proven yourself a formidable negotiator, Sarah. The Blackwood family may benefit from such unexpected perspectives. I accepted his handshake. I look forward to contributing to the family in many ways, Mr. Blackwood. Victoria's farewell was much cooler, but her eyes held a new, cautious respect. The old dynamics were dead. We had established ourselves as equals, united with a foundation of honesty and power that was strong enough to build a real marriage on. Once the Blackwoods were gone, the opulent private dining room felt strangely quiet, the immense pressure of the confrontation receding like a rapidly closing tide. Grant immediately pulled me across the table and into his arms, right there next to the unused breadbasket, burying his face in my neck. You were magnificent, he whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of relief and immense pride. Absolutely magnificent. You brought the receipts and broke the Blackwood legacy of intimidation in one smooth, surgical move. We were magnificent, I corrected him, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. Together. That's the entire point. You stood up to them, Grant. You delivered the ultimatum and the non-negotiable terms. That's something I needed to see. His smile was genuine, untainted by the worry of the last 2 days. I am never going back to that, Sarah. Never again will I let them use me or our relationship to enforce their control. You showed me what real courage looks like. We spent the next few hours solidifying our victory and our strategy for the next day. We called Harold, who was predictably delighted. Best leverage I've seen this year, Sarah. Keep the pressure on. Their lawyers will find the new document is completely airtight and fair. They'll concede. Just don't budge on the 3 p.m. deadline. The next day, Thursday, was a study in high-stakes legal stalling. The Blackwood legal team requested endless extensions, cited complexities in my tutor flow valuation, and tried every tactic in the book to delay the signing past the wedding date. But we were resolute. Grant, now fully engaged and resolute, handled the communication. He drafted a crisp professional email, copied to both his father and mother, a move that ensured maximum visibility and pressure. The deadline for the execution of the mutually protective prenuptial agreement remains firm. 3 p.m. today. If the document is not signed by 3 p.m., Sarah and I will proceed with the immediate cancellation of the wedding and make a public statement regarding the family conflict and the reason for the decision. It was corporate warfare, clean, brutal, and targeted, and Grant was now leading the charge for us. The emotional warfare was still being waged by Victoria, who tried every maneuver in her playbook. She sent Grant a tearful, accusatory text, claiming I was tearing the family apart over a piece of paper. She even called my mother, attempting to use the teacher-to-teacher connection to persuade her to influence me toward compromise. My mom, bless her middle-class, principled heart, simply told Victoria that her daughter was an adult, a successful businesswoman, and only required the respect she had earned. The external pressure mounted throughout the afternoon. I felt a sense of calm detachment, knowing we had done everything ethically and strategically necessary. At 2:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the final, non-negotiable deadline, Grant's phone pinged with a text from Richard's administrative assistant. It was a scanned PDF. "It's signed," Grant said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. He showed me the document, the new, balanced prenup, executed by Richard and Victoria Blackwood. We had won the battle. What now? I asked Grant, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Now, he said, pulling me close, we focus on the one thing that actually matters, our marriage. But first, we need to define our new life, Sarah. I need to know you trust me to maintain these boundaries. We spent the next 2 hours using Grant's legal pads, meticulously mapping out the unflinching boundaries of our new life with the Blackwoods, a constitution for our marriage. 1. Weekly dinners are out. We established a clear, non-negotiable expectation of a single family dinner on the first Sunday of every month, no exceptions. 2. Financial autonomy. Tutor Flow is my business, completely separate from Blackwood and Associates. Grant would continue his legal practice, and our careers would remain independent. 3. Home. We would not live in the family's preferred Lake Forest neighborhood. We would find a place downtown, reflecting our shared identity and independence. 4. Mutual respect. Any instance of condescension or financial slight from Richard or Victoria would result in an immediate, agreed-upon consequence, a shortened visit or a canceled dinner. This was more than just a win on paper. It was an act of profound emotional maturity that cemented our partnership. We weren't just fighting his parents. We were setting the foundation for an equal marriage, free from generational control. Later that evening, as I stood in my closet, looking at my wedding dress, the sleek, modern design that Victoria had subtly called budget-friendly, I felt a profound shift. I was no longer hiding my light, standing up to them, revealing my true position, and demanding respect had lifted a huge, silent weight off my shoulders. I realized the greatest asset my grandfather had left me wasn't the $9 million. It was the courage to value my self-worth above external validation. That realization, quiet and powerful, was the real, rock-solid foundation I was walking down the aisle on. Friday morning, the wedding day, arrived with an unexpected, almost supernatural calm. The crisis was averted, the legal battle won, and the predatory contract replaced by a fair, signed agreement. The day felt less like a wedding and more like a hard-won commencement ceremony. I was in a small, ornate antechamber at the Drake Hotel, the air thick with the scent of white roses and the nervous energy of my bridesmaids. My wedding dress, the one Victoria had quietly mocked for its simplicity, felt perfect, a sleek, modern column of silk that made me feel like the confident, self-made woman I was. Jenna, my maid of honor, adjusted my veil, her eyes suspiciously bright. "You look stunning, Sarah, but you know what's really different? You look free." She finally stopped hiding her light, my mother supplied gently from across the room, where she was meticulously arranging the train of my dress. My parents, who had lived a lifetime on the principles of hard work and quiet dignity, were immensely proud of how I had handled the corporate ambush with grace and ferocity. There was a soft, tentative knock at the door. Before anyone could answer, the door opened, and Victoria Blackwood walked in. This was a completely different Victoria. She was not in her usual intimidating designer armor. She wore a soft, pale blue dress that was elegant but intentionally understated, an outfit that complemented, rather than competed with, the bridal ensemble. It was a conscious choice, and that observation alone told me something significant had shifted in her perception. "May I have a moment alone with Sarah?" she asked, her voice quiet, lacking its usual sharp edge of command. My mother and Jenna exchanged a quick, knowing glance, nodded, and quietly slipped out, closing the door behind them. I was left alone, face to face with my soon-to-be mother-in-law. My heart gave a single, hard thump, but I remained utterly calm. I was ready for whatever tactic, emotional, or strategic she chose next. Victoria approached slowly, taking in my appearance. She paused, her gaze lingering on the delicate pearl earrings from my grandfather. "You make a beautiful bride, Sarah," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but something in her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability and perhaps genuine self-reproach, was new and startling. "Thank you, Victoria." She reached out, her hand hesitant, and gently touched the delicate lace of my veil, a surprisingly tender gesture from a woman who usually only touched things to assess their market value. "I owe you an apology, Sarah," she said, looking down at her hand, gathering her resolve. A proper one, not the defensive acknowledgement I offered at the restaurant. I was genuinely shocked. Victoria Blackwood did not apologize. Not for mistakes, and certainly not for character flaws. "My behavior was inexcusable," she continued, speaking quickly, as if afraid the words might choke her. "Not just the prenuptial ambush, but the months of subtle condescension and judgment before that. I made careless assumptions based entirely on superficial factors, your car, your parents' profession, and I never bothered to know the real woman my son loves." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. The years of emotional armor she wore were momentarily cracked. "That cannot have been easy to admit," I acknowledged, softening my stance, recognizing the immense effort this must have cost her. A small, wry smile touched her lips. "The Blackwoods are not known for admitting mistakes. It is a terrible family trait. I hope you and Grant will improve upon it in the next generation." Then she reached into her small, elegant clutch and extracted a tiny, antique velvet box. "I brought you something, a peace offering perhaps, and a piece of history that speaks to courage." I accepted the box cautiously and opened it. Inside, nestled on the satin, was a pair of stunning diamond and sapphire earrings. They clearly had significant age and history. They weren't just expensive. They were lineage, priceless in their symbolism. "These belonged to Grant's great-grandmother, Evelyn," Victoria explained, her voice now filled with reverence. "She was the daughter of a factory worker who married into the Blackwood family against considerable opposition. Much like you, I suppose. She went on to save the family business during the Great Depression through sheer determination and business acumen that her husband lacked." The parallels were obvious, and the symbolic meaning of the gift was profound. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a recognition of my own merit and potential contribution. Victoria was acknowledging that I, the dismissed middle-class girl, was the spiritual successor to the family's greatest, most hard-fought matriarch. "They are beautiful, Victoria," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture and the story. "Thank you for sharing this history with me. Perhaps you would consider wearing them today?" she suggested. "Something old and something blue, as they say. Evelyn's courage suits you, Sarah." I nodded, carefully removing my grandfather's pearl earrings and allowing Victoria to help me put on the sapphire ones. It was a small, quiet moment of profound connection, a tentative bridge across the chasm that had separated us. "Grant loves you deeply," she said as she stepped back, her full composure slowly returning. "That should have been enough for me from the beginning. I hope you can forgive my failure to see that." "I think we have both learned something about assumptions and appearances," I replied, allowing the conversation to move toward resolution. "Moving forward, based on respect, is what matters now." She nodded, composed herself with visible effort, and turned toward the door. "Well, I should rejoin Richard. Your father will be here shortly." She paused at the threshold, her eyes holding mine, and her voice was firm, yet respectful. "Welcome to the family, Sarah. Truly." I looked at my reflection. The sapphire earrings caught the light, sparkling with the history of Evelyn, a fighter much like myself. The crisis of the last 3 days had been brutal, but it had stripped away the facade, forcing both sides, Grant as parents and even myself, to deal with the truth. That painful confrontation had bought me something priceless: unflinching generational respect. My father, bless his kind, honest heart, walked in minutes later, his eyes already misty the moment he saw me. He was wearing his best suit, the one he wore every year for the high school graduation ceremony. "My brilliant girl," he whispered, embracing me carefully to avoid crushing the layers of silk. "Ready to start this new chapter?" "More than ready, Dad," I assured him. Because now this new chapter wasn't a fragile compromise. It was a strong proclamation of equality. The ceremony itself was everything I had hoped for: intimate, heartfelt, and deeply meaningful, despite the intimidating grandeur of the venue and the large guest list. The moments I cherished were not the lavish gestures, but the quiet, profound ones. Grant's face, when he saw me walking down the aisle, was pure unadulterated, blinding love. All the stress, the conflict, the corporate posturing of the past week vanished in the face of that shared, powerful emotion. We spoke our vows, traditional words imbued with a new, profound layer of meaning only we understood. We weren't just promising love and fidelity. We were promising partnership, honesty, and a united front against the world, including his family's occasionally suffocating expectations. It was a covenant forged under duress, and therefore unbreakable. At the reception, the shift in social dynamics was both hilarious and immensely gratifying. The social circle, Grant's relatives and his parents' closest, most influential friends, who, just days ago, were undoubtedly gossiping about the ambitious schoolteacher's daughter, now approached me with genuine interest and thinly veiled curiosity. The condescension was gone, replaced by a cautious, respectful intrigue. Richard, the ultimate pragmatist, was the most satisfying transformation. He made a point of introducing me to his most influential business associates, senior partners, powerful judges, and titans of finance, with unmistakable pride, meticulously emphasizing my success as the founder and CEO of TutorFlow. Sarah's company recently secured a major funding round, he announced to a formidable federal judge. She brings a necessary, innovative, and frankly, disruptive perspective to our family, one that we value highly. He was literally using my $9 million and my competence as a point of pride, something he never could have done with a traditional society bride. Victoria, meanwhile, subtly ensured that I was seated next to her oldest and most feared social confidant, a clear, unspoken signal to her peers that I was now an accepted, powerful, and respected member of the inner circle. It was a social maneuver designed to neutralize any lingering gossip. Grant caught my eye during our first dance as husband and wife, a slow, gentle sway under the immense crystal chandelier. Amazing what a signed, balanced prenup and $9 million can do for one's social standing, he murmured with a dark, satisfied humor only we shared. It's not the money, Grant, I replied, leaning into him, the sapphire earrings glittering at my neck. It's about standing up for yourself. It's the sheer audacity of demanding respect. Perhaps it's a bit of both, he acknowledged, his smile tender and genuine. Either way, I've never been prouder to call you my wife. The true weight of my grandfather's legacy hit me again. The $7 million wasn't just cash, it was leverage. It was the tool that allowed me to bypass the classism and prejudice that had defined my early relationship with the Blackwoods. My inheritance was the unseen inheritance, the freedom to choose my own path and the power to command respect, not beg for it. It was the ultimate gift of independence. I looked over at Victoria, who was watching us dance. She caught my eye, and instead of her usual forced, thin smile, she offered a genuine, warm, almost vulnerable nod of approval. It was a sign of true, earned progress. We hadn't just secured a marriage. We had secured a mutual, albeit cautious, truce with the Blackwood matriarch. The road ahead wouldn't be perfectly smooth. Victoria was Victoria, after all, but the foundation was absolutely solid. We had established ourselves as equals, partners in both love and finance, and that truth was powerful enough to absorb any future shocks. My quiet life had exploded, but out of the chaos a new, stronger reality had emerged. I was marrying the man I loved, not despite his family, but because we had both fought for the marriage on our own terms. Our honeymoon was not merely a trip. It was a blissful, necessary decompression, a complete mental evacuation from the suffocating corporate battlefield of Chicago. 2 weeks in the Greek Isles, starting with the pristine white and blue cliffs of Santorini, moving on to the dynamic energy of Mykonos, and finishing on a few quieter, wind-swept patches of rock in the Cyclades. Felt like an eternity away from Richard's stern power suits and Victoria's scrutinizing gaze. We were simply Grant and Sarah again. No Blackwood expectations, no Tudor Flow deadlines. Just two people in love, exploring tiny cobblestone streets and swimming in crystal blue Aegean waters. The greatest transformation was visible in Grant. He was palpably lighter, laughing more freely, unburdened by the secrecy he had kept about the prenup and the crushing obligation he had felt toward his parents. The crisis had burned away the vestiges of the compliant Blackwood heir, leaving behind the honest partner I had fallen in love with. During a quiet dinner overlooking the caldera in Santorini, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grant reached across the table, his hand covering mine, his eyes earnest. "I need to apologize again, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "Not just for the prenup, but for my blindness. For 3 years I thought I was protecting you from my family's snobbery, when in reality I was enabling it. I was so focused on maintaining my comfort zone, I failed to recognize that you are stronger, wealthier, and frankly, more principled than anyone else in that room." "We both kept secrets, Grant," I reminded him gently. "My silence allowed them to construct a false narrative. Your silence allowed that narrative to become policy. We both made mistakes, but we faced the truth and we stood together. That's the only part that matters now." We spent hours talking, not about the wedding or the business logistics, but about the future we were actively going to build. The marriage crisis had forced us to address the deep philosophical differences in our upbringings much earlier than most couples. We had skipped the surface conversations and dove straight into the bedrock of our values. We talked about money, openly and honestly, for the first time in our relationship. Grant revealed the structure of his own family trusts and his salary from his successful legal career. Significant wealth, but handled with the detachment of someone who inherited it. I explained the careful, purposeful management of my inheritance and the aggressive, yet ethical, growth strategy of Tudor Flow. We decided on our permanent financial covenant. Everything earned during the marriage would be split 50-50, as stipulated in the new prenup. But our legacy assets, his trusts, my Tudor Flow equity, would remain separate, growing independently, reviewed annually. It was a true financial partnership, based on mutual respect for each other's financial histories and personal goals. "We are building our own dynasty, Sarah," Grant mused one night, watching the moonlight cast silver across the water. "Not a Blackwood legacy, and not just a Miller one. Something new. Something based on equity, not control. And boundaries," I added, laughing. "Lots of clear, non-negotiable boundaries. The boundaries we had mapped out in my office back in Chicago were constantly reinforced. We agreed to uphold the single, monthly family dinner rule, no matter the manipulation attempts from Victoria. We agreed that our home would be entirely ours, chosen together, decorated by us, reflecting our shared, modern aesthetic, not his family's heavy, ornate tastes in Lake Forest. It was during this time that I truly appreciated the ultimate human lesson of the entire ordeal, the strength of an intergenerational legacy. Grant's great-grandmother, Evelyn, a working-class woman who saved the Blackwood fortune, and my grandfather, a high school teacher who quietly amassed millions through intelligent planning, were two sides of the same coin. They represented integrity, foresight, and quiet power. We weren't just two young people getting married. We were consciously merging two powerful, principled legacies. The prenup itself, the document that had caused such pain, now rested securely in a safe deposit box, hopefully never to be seen again. Its true value, as I often reflected, had been in the painful, necessary process of defining our values and securing our partnership before the inevitable compromises of married life set in. By the time our flight landed back at O'Hare International Airport, I wasn't just returning as Grant Blackwood's wife. I was returning as Mrs. Sarah Miller Blackwood, CEO and equal partner, armed with a clear vision and a husband who was now a full, unwavering ally. We were ready to face the world and the Blackwoods as a united front. The escape was over. The hard work of building our life with our newly established boundaries was about to begin. 6 months into our marriage, the honeymoon tan had faded. The thank you notes were sent, and the real-world test of our carefully constructed boundaries began. We had found and purchased a beautiful, modern loft in the West Loop, a rapidly developing, vibrant neighborhood that was deliberately neutral territory, far from the sprawling Lake Forest estates, and it felt perfectly us. It was here in our own space that the Blackwood machine mounted its inevitable, subtle counterattack. The first challenge came, predictably, from Victoria regarding the Blackwood Sunday dinner tradition. It started subtly. First, a text suggesting we drop by for a casual weeknight dinner, knowing Grant was usually home late from the law firm. We declined politely, citing existing work commitments. Then came the heavy-handed, guilt-laden approach. "Darling," Victoria purred over the phone one Friday, her tone thick with manipulative concern. "I was just speaking to Richard. The first Sunday dinner of the month is simply not sufficient, and you are hurting your father's feelings. We've missed you terribly. The entire family is accustomed to a weekly gathering. We are family, Sarah, not business associates who require an appointment, are we?" This was the classic emotional manipulation we had anticipated. She was trying to shift the dynamic back to family obligation, where her word was law and dissent was an act of personal malice. Grant and I had a pre-agreed response that we had meticulously rehearsed. We waited until Sunday morning, then Grant called her back. He stood in our bright, modern kitchen, holding the phone, his stance radiating the firm. New boundary, he wore like a suit of armor. "Mom," he said, his voice steady, respectful, but absolute. "Sarah and I value our time with you, but we also need to build our own traditions and our own rhythm as a couple. The first Sunday of the month is our standing commitment. We enjoy our time in Lake Forest, but weekly is not sustainable for us right now, and that's a mutual decision. We need our space." Victoria's response was a theatrical sigh, heavy with martyrdom, followed by a sharp, passive-aggressive jab. "I suppose some people simply don't understand the responsibilities that come with being a Blackwood and the demands of this family's reputation. But very well. We will try to manage the disappointment of the family, especially your aunts." That was the crucial moment. If Grant had apologized, if he had conceded an extra dinner, or even promised to visit the following week, the entire boundary would have crumbled. Instead, he ended the conversation smoothly. "Looking forward to seeing you in 3 weeks, Mom. Tell Dad I'll send him those files he requested on Monday. Have a wonderful Sunday." Victoria hung up abruptly, but the boundary held. It was a small victory, but it solidified our status as equals. She realized that manipulating one of us was now impossible because she was dealing with a united front, a partnership that prioritized its own needs and schedule. Richard, the pragmatist, expressed his evolving respect in entirely different ways. He was less focused on domestic control and more interested in my professional sphere. He invited me to consult on a massive, firm-wide technology upgrade for Blackwood and Associates. I accepted the invitation, using my expertise from Tudor Flow and my knowledge of modern, scalable tech. During the first meeting at the firm's downtown office, I laid out my recommendations for migrating their decades-old server systems to modern, secure cloud-based platforms and utilizing AI for early case filtering. Ideas that were cutting-edge and efficient, but utterly foreign to his old-school, paper-heavy legal firm. To my surprise, Richard actually listened. He asked insightful, demanding questions, treating my input as that of a peer, not a spouse's hobbyist wife. He ultimately approved a phased implementation of my entire aggressive plan. He even sent me a formal, signed letter of engagement and appreciation, a document that spoke volumes coming from a man who measured respect in billable hours and contractual agreements. Then came the bigger milestone. When TutorFlow secured a major, highly public contract with the Chicago public school system, a massive public win for my company. Richard sent me a congratulatory note that was both professional and genuinely warm, acknowledging the sheer scale of the achievement and the difficulty of navigating public contracts. It was clear the money had bought me their attention, but my proven competence and professional success had earned their genuine respect. The old Blackwood mentality that only inherited wealth mattered was slowly, painfully giving way to the reality that self-made, ethical success could be equally, if not more, formidable. We weren't just married. We were building a life where Grant and I contributed our expertise equally, whether it was managing our combined finances or navigating the complicated, often treacherous currents of his family dynamics. The tension still existed, but it was now a productive tension, a friction that led to growth rather than destruction. We had survived the ultimate test of wills, and in doing so, we had forged a partnership stronger than any contract. As the first year of our marriage transitioned into the second, the confrontation over the prenup, once a source of searing emotional and legal pain, began to transform into something profoundly constructive. It became the clear, definitive starting line for a marriage based on radical transparency and unwavering truth. My relationship with Victoria, in particular, evolved from a cautious, armed truce to something resembling mutual respect, often manifesting in surprisingly collaborative ways. One late afternoon, Victoria called me, not to manipulate or criticize our schedule, but to discuss a serious problem she was facing with a major charity event. She needed a new, innovative, and utterly secure way to handle online fundraising and registration for the annual Blackwood Foundation Gala, a pillar of their social and philanthropic standing. "I need something sleek, modern, and completely efficient, Sarah," she admitted over the phone, her voice crisp and pragmatic, dropping the usual emotional layers. "Honestly, your system at TutorFlow, the infrastructure you built, is far more robust and user-friendly than anything our expensive consultants have proposed. Would you consider allowing your team to design and implement a bespoke platform for the foundation?" I agreed instantly, recognizing this as a massive, powerful olive branch. She wasn't asking for my money. She was asking for my mind, the ultimate form of acceptance from Victoria Blackwood. This was the acknowledgement that my self-made success and intellectual property were superior to the old guard systems. Working on the project together, me providing the strategic tech solutions, her providing the political landscape and donor management expertise, was surprisingly effective. We found a rhythm, an understanding of each other's demanding intensity and unwavering drive for perfection. During a working lunch at a downtown gallery cafe, she unexpectedly opened up about her own past, something she almost never did. "Evelyn," she said, referencing the great-grandmother whose sapphire earrings I wore constantly. She faced the exact same disdain I showed you. The family thought she was beneath them, a factory girl who married up, but she had the grit, the foresight, and the pure audacity to save them all during the Depression. I see that same fire in you, Sarah. It takes a certain kind of courage to walk away from a fortune, which is what I thought you were doing when you refused to sign our contract. And it takes another kind of courage to reveal a fortune when you've been underestimated your whole life. It wasn't a full, verbose apology for the months of condescension, but it was a profound, deeply personal acknowledgement of my worth, tying my strength directly to the heritage she valued most. She wasn't just accepting me as Grant's wife. She was deliberately claiming me as the family's next powerful, necessary matriarch. This shared understanding of grit and intellectual power extended to Richard as well. He began seeking my advice not just on the technical systems of the firm, but on broader business ethics, market trends, and growth potential outside the traditional law firm structure. He saw the world I operated in, fast, dynamic, merit-based, as the future, and he recognized I was his essential, innovative link to it. He treated me with an intellectual curiosity that was far more valuable than any social compliment. The most significant evolution, however, was in our shared household. We intentionally bought and completely renovated an old brownstone in Lincoln Park, a place we chose together, intentionally combining our individual resources and aesthetic tastes. The heavy, dark blackwood antiques mingled surprisingly well with my modern, clean-line furniture. We made major financial decisions as a cohesive team, Grant handling the larger corporate investments with Richard's counsel, and I'm managing our portfolio growth with a focus on ethical tech and emerging markets. The prenuptial agreement, the document that had threatened to destroy us, now lay silently in the safe deposit box. Its existence was no longer a threat, but a powerful symbol of our commitment to transparency and equality. Its true value was entirely contained in the foundation of trust and respect it had forced us to build. As I reflected on the turmoil, I realized I was deeply grateful for the crisis. It had forced us to confront our most painful, hidden issues: Grant's fear, my secrecy, and the Blackwood's entrenched classism, all within 3 explosive days. Smooth sailing never could have forged a foundation this strong. We learned that true partnership requires both vulnerability and strength, the courage to reveal your whole self, and the fortitude to stand up for the relationship you want to build. Our marriage was no longer about 2 families merging assets. It was about 2 equals merging lives, guided by a shared vision of independence, integrity, and respect. The second year of our marriage settled into a powerful rhythm. We had successfully navigated the turbulent waters of family politics and established a working peace with the formidable Blackwoods, built on the solid bedrock of earned respect. I was no longer fighting for my place. I was simply existing in it, and the difference was profound. The change in the family dynamic was now a quiet, accepted reality rather than a point of conflict. The monthly Sunday dinners were maintained, and while Victoria still offered unsolicited, detailed advice on everything from which political candidates to support to the appropriate length for the curtains in our new brownstone, it was delivered with a new, strange layer of deference. She no longer saw me as a financial risk or a social inferior, but as a genuine asset, a brilliant, fiercely independent woman who would ensure the Blackwood name, through Grant, continued to thrive in the modern, challenging world. Richard and I had fully settled into a surprising, effective mentorship. He admired my rapid, self-made success, the kind of wealth he only read about in tech journals. I, in turn, highly valued his deep, old-school understanding of institutional power and how to navigate entrenched corporate structures. He often called me for advice before making a major investment outside the traditional bond market, a quiet, professional sign that his respect was now absolute. There was a particular moment that solidified this shift for me. Richard was discussing a complex lobbying case where his firm needed to understand the public education sector's technology needs. Instead of relying on expensive consultants, he simply said, "Grant, have Sarah draft the analysis. She knows that ecosystem better than anyone we can hire." This was not just respect, it was reliance. Grant, meanwhile, had fully shed the last vestiges of his fear of confrontation. He stood firm on our boundaries, always prioritizing our partnership and our shared life. He often told me that facing his parents with the full truth of my net worth and his own unwavering commitment had been the single, most liberating moment of his adult life, freeing him from the shadow of their impossible expectations. Our home in Lincoln Park was the physical representation of our unified identity. We had intentionally mixed my minimalist, modern furniture with Grant's few treasured family pieces. There was no Blackwood dominance. There was simply us. We continued to make financial decisions as a team, Grant handling the legacy investments and institutional banking, and I'm managing the high-growth, ethical tech portfolio. Our financial covenant, equality in all marital earnings, but independence in legacy assets, was working perfectly, ensuring neither of us felt controlled or indebted. Then came the ultimate human expansion of our partnership. We began discussing our future, our family. We were actively planning to start a family, and we began renovating the spare room in our brownstone into a nursery. In that quiet room, filled with the promise of a new life, I often looked at the framed photo of Grant's great-grandmother, Evelyn, wearing her determined, resolute expression. Her story, passed down by Victoria, was now a treasured part of my own narrative. I realized my fundamental difference in perspective, that wealth is about independence, not control, continued to shape my healthy interactions with my in-laws. I had changed the Blackwood dynasty by refusing to be changed by it. I often thought about my grandfather and Evelyn. Their stories taught me that the most enduring legacy isn't inherited money, but inherited grit, the courage to stand firm on your principles, regardless of the pressure. The confrontation over the prenup, once a source of deep anxiety, was now a powerful anecdote. The story of how we had to destroy the old foundation before we could build a truly equitable one. It was the story of how Grant chose me and how I forced his family to recognize him and me as leaders of the next generation. We had built a successful marriage, an empire founded not on inherited wealth, but on earned equality. 2 years later, I stood in my office, looking out over the expansive Chicago skyline, the city a vibrant tapestry of steel and glass below me. Tudor Flow was thriving, having just secured a major expansion into California and opening a new round of funding. I was no longer Sarah Miller, the tech entrepreneur with a secret. I was Sarah Miller Blackwood, the successful CEO, openly recognized as Grant's equal partner in every single sphere of our life. The professional recognition was immense, but the true victory was domestic. The Blackwood family dynamics were permanently, irrevocably altered. The monthly Sunday dinners were still maintained, a respectful nod to tradition, and while Victoria occasionally delivered unsolicited, detailed advice on everything from which schools were acceptable for future children to the portfolio weightings, it was always delivered with that new layer of respect. She saw me not as a challenger, but as a necessary asset, a brilliant, fiercely independent woman who would ensure the Blackwood future. Through Grant, continued to ascend. Richard and I shared a genuine, effective partnership. He valued my foresight, I valued his experience. Their subtle attempts at control had vanished, replaced by a mutual respect that felt earned, not bought. Grant, meanwhile, had fully stepped into his own power. He stood firm on our boundaries, always prioritizing our partnership and our shared life. His courage during the prenup crisis had liberated him from the lifelong shadow of his parents' expectations. He was a better lawyer, a better partner, and a happier man because of the confrontation. We had bought and beautifully renovated our brownstone, a perfect blend of our two lives. The nursery was finished, painted a soft, peaceful yellow, waiting for the arrival of our first child. In that quiet room, I often looked at the framed wedding photo. The image itself, the elegant dress, the smiling faces, was less important than the memory of the conflict that preceded it. The 3 days of brutal, honest confrontation were the defining moments of our marriage, the true crucible that separated the superficial from the fundamental. I realized my fundamental difference in perspective, that wealth is about independence and creation, not control and maintenance, had been the key to reshaping my healthy interactions with my in-laws. I often thought about my grandfather and Evelyn. Their stories taught me that the most enduring legacy isn't inherited money, but inherited grit, the courage to stand firm on your principles, regardless of the pressure. When faced with that prenuptial ultimatum, I had chosen the harder path of confrontation and truth. That choice set the non-negotiable tone for our marriage, not as an outsider to be managed, but as an equal contributor to be respected. The real gold, I discovered, wasn't just in my bank account. It was in the strength to reveal who I truly was, and in the unwavering love of a man who ultimately chose to stand with me on a solid, equitable foundation. We had faced the dragon and we had won. And now, hand in hand, we were ready to build our own powerful empire together. Thanks for listening my story.